Greetings and welcome to today's landscape kind of painting. Today we are going to make it a little more interesting and we're going to add a structure, a home, a building into it. It is going to be full of bricks and it'll be an exciting new challenge. It should also be quite fun because we have a lot of different colors in the sky and there's a lot of different things to learn about how different colors mix and why we make the choices we do. Also worth noting, as per usual, if you'd like help with the drawing process, there is the digital sketch up over on Patreon to help you with just that, and you can find the full hour-long version along with over 40 others up over on Patreon as well. It's also just a great way to support the channel. With that said, I would like to also note that if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. I'm here and happy to help, and I forgot what I was saying. Right, by the way, there is going to be a holiday sale. It is 25% off all ebooks, so if you've been wanting to pick up my ebook Acrylics for Beginners or one of the painting prompts, you can do so now at a very reduced price. So thank you for stopping by. Again, I'm here to help, and now let's jump into today's hour-long cut-up lesson thing. As per usual, we're going to begin our painting in the sky. I'm going to grab my larger square-headed brush because it can cover a lot of surface area. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water and wipe off the excess so that it's just damp. This, of course, will allow my paints to stay wet longer and help me carry the paints farther. I'm going to take some titanium white and move that to a new spot on my palette. I'm going to grab some primary yellow, about a quarter of the titanium white that I used, and then I'm going to grab about a quarter red of the yellow that I used. So I'm using less and less of each pigment as I go along. I want this to be very bright, I want it to be desaturated, and I want it to be quite thick. And that's really what the titanium white's going to do. It really thickens pigments. Primary colors are much more thin, and if you don't want to do too many layers in your painting, I would generally suggest that you start with a good amount of titanium white or Mars black in your initial layering. Now here, as you can see, I'm applying my new goldish color to the base of my horizon, and then I'm just blending upwards back and forth. I'm using a fairly soft stroke, that way I don't get any harsh lines in there, and I'm covering up parts of my foreground, but that's okay, because I can see through the acrylic paint because it is semi-transparent and because I did the initial drawing in a fine-tipped Sharpie. Now I'm going to head over to my palette and mix my next color, and I'm going to do it right beside this one, that way I have a very accurate assessment of how they'll look together on the canvas. I'm going to grab a bit of primary red, I'm going to grab a little bit more titanium white, and as you can see, this is very saturated still. These two together, they don't blend as well as they should, so I'm going to grab some extra titanium white, move that down here, and try that. And this color works so much better with this. They both have a similar value, similar amount of light, and they aren't too saturated. So now I'm going to move this right on top of our yellow and blend down into it. There we go. And I'm able to blend this so smoothly into that previous layer because that previous layer had some water on it from the brush and it kept it wet longer. Here you can see that I am going back over it a number of times, and I'm allowing the top pink now to be a little bit more saturated, so I'm grabbing a hint more primary red, working that in. That way I continue my gradient, and that extra primary red, it's going to saturate it more, but it's also going to be a slightly darker color, as you can see. So it starts creating this nice vignette effect around the painting and draws the eye in towards the middle of the painting a little bit more. Now we're going to head up to the top of our painting and we're going to incorporate a little bit of purple up there, darken it, desaturate it, and continue our gradient, giving it a little bit more depth. Now I don't have purple on my palette, but I can make it by taking some primary red and then about half that of primary blue. Primary blue is a much stronger pigment, a much more heavily saturated pigment, so if you mix about an equal amount of them together, you'll get more of a blue. So if you want a purple, you need to just keep adding red until you get the purple that you want. And again, I'm mixing this right next to a color I just used so I know how it will blend with that pigment. This is extremely dark, so we'll need to brighten it up. Grab a lot of titanium white right there. Create something nice, desaturated, but it still has that hint of purple. Now I'm also going to grab a hint of Mars Black to darken it and also to desaturate it a little bit more. So let's head up to the top of our canvas, start blending, covering the top. And as you can see, there's a hard line. That's okay. We will work that in just a second. Just going to bring it down to about halfway of where I want it to be in the end. Now I'm going to clean my brush really well. Want it to be clean but damp. Going to set my palette down, hold my canvas as this is going to be a fairly detailed area. Make sure I don't have too much water on my brush. And then I'm going to blend this purple into this pink. For this next step, I'm going to take my larger square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, make it nice and damp as we do. Then I'm going to find a color that looks fairly close to this right here. And that's because the mountain isn't going to be its natural pigment. It's going to have a lot of reflected color from the atmosphere. So I'm going to start by mixing a color right beside that one so I know what I'm doing, what it's going to look like beside it. I'm going to grab a little bit of extra Mars Black this time because I want it to be a bit darker and I want it to be a bit more desaturated as well. So I'm just going to play with this until I get a nice, slightly darker, slightly more desaturated purple. And you make colors more desaturated by adding a combination of Mars Black and titanium white because they make a gray. You can also mix the complementary color which will desaturate it, but it's a little bit more complicated and you can do a fairly good job with Mars Black and titanium white. Now here you can see that I'm using the edge of my square-headed brush to create these nice fine sharp lines in the mountain. And then I'm going to take the paint right under that top sharp line and I'm going to blend it down. I did the sharp line first because that's when my brush has the most paint and it's the most damp, so I'm able to be the most precise with it. And then when I move into these more open areas, I can kind of just spread the paint about. Nice and easy. I'm going to switch over to my medium-sized square-headed brush so I have a little bit more detail-oriented work. I'm going to grab a hint more Mars Black, work that into our pigment. As you can see, it's a little bit darker, not too much. And then I'm just going to work that along the bottom, and then I'll blend it up. I'm going to switch to my smaller square-headed brush because it's much more detail-oriented. I'm going to dip it in water, make it nice and damp. I'm going to come up with a highlight for that pigment. And for that, I'm really going to try to match the purple that I have right here. So I'm going to take some primary red, hint of primary blue, bit more primary red. Grab a lot of titanium white. Titanium white really is the key to this pigment. And there, as you can see, we're fairly close. I'm going to grab a hint of Mars Black as we did, just like when we mixed that initial purple. Mars Black is very strong, so use a very minimal amount to begin with. Now, I'm going to head to the top of my mountain, work on the area that I think is going to be receiving the most light, then kind of create an interesting edging and detail down the mountain. For this next step here, I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush because we're going to be painting the trees in here and it's going to be very detail-oriented. So I'm going to make sure that my brush is nice and damp, as I do, and I'm going to create a color very similar to this for my trees because we're not going to see the true green in them at that distance, especially with all of the atmospheric reflective light that we're getting in this painting. So here I'm mixing up kind of a purple that leans much more towards a blue, and I'm going to make it nice and dark with some Mars Black. And I'm going to make it slightly darker than the pigment that we have right here. And I'm going to do that because I want to stand out from the bottom of our mountains. So once I have this pigment, like I do right here, I'm going to head on in. I'm going to create all of these little vertical lines that are going to represent trees in the distance. Now that our trees are fairly dry, I'm going to move on to the next step in our painting. So I'm going to take my medium-sized square-headed brush. I like this one because it can hold a decent amount of paint, but it's still fairly detailed-oriented. And I'm going to make sure that it's nice and damp. Now I'm going to work on the snow that's right in front of the trees here and work into the foreground. And the snow, it's going to be a similar color to that of the mountains to begin with, because it's going to get a lot of that reflected light and shadow. So I'm going to mix my snow color right beside some of my previous mountain color. That way I know it's nice and similar. And now I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to create a very sharp line, as you can see, separating the black from the white on the canvas. And then I'm going to blend downwards, as you can see here. Now the snow here is going to be a little bit darker because it's going to get a lot of shadow from this, but then we're going to make it brighter as we move forward. I'm going to head back to my palette and I'm going to make it a bit brighter. So I'll take some extra titanium white and move that in there. I'm also going to take a hint more primary red just to give it a little bit more color, saturation, and magic. Now, I'm going to apply that right in front of our previous application, and I'm going to move into it back and forth with these strokes. And I'm not trying to create a perfectly smooth blend between the two. I want slight highlights of one and shadows. That way it looks like the snow is making little dips and coming up and reacting to the light in a very natural way. Now for our next step of the painting, we're going to begin working on our trees. And to do so, I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, make sure that it's nice and damp, and then I'm actually going to create a purple to begin with, one fairly similar to what we have right here. So I'm going to grab some primary red, primary blue, again more primary red than primary blue. I'm going to take a little bit of titanium white, and then to desaturate it, I'm going to take some Mars black. From there, it looks like I just need a bit more red, and a hint more of titanium white. And now we have something fairly close. So, I'm going to begin by working on my trees with this color to show you that, again, we don't normally have to paint everything with the natural coloring, with its innate coloring. We can paint things with the atmospheric reflections on it, and it'll make the piece sit in the painting so much more naturally. Right now, it looks cohesive in the painting, and it does so because it has the same colors of the painting. If we were to paint this green, a vibrant green like a true Christmassy green, then it wouldn't fit. And that's because we don't have any green anywhere else in the painting, and it just wouldn't look cohesive. Now for the next step, I'm going to make the backs a little bit darker and create a bit more depth. I'm going to switch over to the medium-sized square-headed brush, make sure that it's nice and damp. And then I'm going to head over here and I'm going to work a little bit more Mars black into our mixture. And then I'm going to put this, more so, in the middle of the tree, but I'm going to have it work out in the same ways that these edges are. And this is going to make it look like the tree has the shadow coming through on this side. So now we're going to move on to the highlights of our trees, and that's really the snow that's fallen on them. So for that, I'm going to take some titanium white. I'm going to mix it over close near this purple, which we'll use as a reference point, but I'm going to make it a little bit more blue. So there I have my purple, mix it in with our titanium white, and then I'll grab a hint of Mars black as well. And we'll start with this pigment right here. And I'm going to apply this to the edge, the area in which I feel snow would fall, and catch light. So I'm applying it on the edge of my branch. As I get down towards the bottom of the branch, I'm allowing it to bundle up a little bit. I'm adding a bit more of that highlight to it. and that's because this top area isn't going to get too much snow because these areas are catching it. So as we get out towards the end of the branches, we can add a little bit more because there's less disruption. Now we're going to work on the top of our little structure here. I'm going to begin with the smaller square-headed brush because it's very sharp and great for those detail-oriented areas. And I'm going to work with my base dark layer first. So I'm going to take some Mars Black. I'm going to take a hint of my titanium white to make it into a bit more of a gray. And then, because there's going to be some atmospheric light, I'm going to take some red and some blue, mix it up into a nice purple. And again, don't want this to be too dark. I do want it to be a middle of the road dark gray. And then I'm going to work along my edges. Now we're going to continue and do that in the body of the rest of the building as well. So I'm going to take a lot more of this pigment. We'll start at the top because it's closest to this and we can compare the pigment and make sure that it's nice and similar. And then we'll work our way around all of the sharper areas of the painting, like the windows and the roof. Now that most of our building is dry, I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush and create a nice color for our snow. So I'll take some primary blue, primary red, and a good amount of titanium white, and I'll mix those over here where we have our previous mixtures for snow. That way, again, we make sure it's nice and cohesive within the rest of the painting. Then, I'm going to head to the top here, and I'm just going to kind of tap on this, and I'm tapping it rather than making a smooth line. That way it looks like little bits of snow are kind of coming down inconsistently on the tops of the roof here, and they're just going to make it a bit more interesting. Now we're going to work on some bricks in our building, and I'm actually going to do that with the same square-headed brush. It's incredibly useful. And for our bricks, I'm finally going to take some of our burnt umber that we have, work it into another part of our painting. I'm going to grab some of our primary red here, warm up that burnt umber. I'm going to grab some of our titanium white, and I'm going to grab a hint of our Mars Black as well because we don't want it to be too saturated. But there we have a nice warm brick color. And I'm going to work these bricks on with the corner of my brush. You can see I'm really able to make a good number of them because they're just so small. I'm able to keep all of that paint on my brush. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but Howie has woken up from his nap. Hey, Howie. So now we're going to jump right back into our painting and create some light coming from these windows. And we're going to create a very similar pigment to this because it's showing through right there, and it's a very natural warm pigment. Luckily we still have that open here on our palette, so I'm going to mix some little bit of orange together, and I'm going to grab some titanium white and make a fairly similar pigment to what we had right there. Maybe I'll add a hint more primary red just because it's a little bit higher up and closer to impacting the pink. So, just going to mix that up nice and easy. We have a very similar pigment. And now, I'm going to go over our drawing using the small square-headed brush because look, it just fits so perfectly. Now to finish off our snow here on the building and kind of straighten up the building itself, again, I want a little bit of a curve, but I don't want too much. I'm going to mix some purple in with some titanium white, create a nice snow pigment, and then I'm going to go from all the way up here and then work my way down and just kind of create a new line for the house. Make it a little bit more straight. Here we can have it move into the foreground of it, but it'll define it so parts of it aren't getting lost in the trees and the background, and it'll give us the opportunity to move it out a little bit. Now I'm going to take a little bit of extra snow, make it a little bit more blue, a little bit less bright, and I'm going to work it down here on the pathway itself. And I'm going to do this in little clumps and little strands here and there. I want to make it look like it was shoveled, but there's still some snow left. Still looks like winter. Still has their same colors and pigments as everything else. Now that we have some clean water and clean brushes, we can move on to the final step of the painting, which is adding falling snow. So I'm going to begin here by adding a lot of water to my brush, getting some titanium white, moving it out to a clean spot on my palette, getting a little bit of extra water on there until it's almost like working with watercolor, getting a good amount on my brush here. And I'm going to peel my bristles back, and I'm going to launch some snow at the canvas, as you can see. Very simple, very easy way of rendering just so many different implications and pieces of snow on your painting. Now we can also add some larger little pieces of snow by actually taking the brush and applying them. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.